Grant Avery stepped slowly across the red brick of Maple Ridge Station, his cane planted firmly at his side, carrying the weight of memories from the war. A boy's voice rang out, screaming "Mom," trembling amidst the indifferent crowd. Grant crouched to the boy's level, placing a water bottle and the dog tag before him, and simply by being there, the boy's fear began to ease. Grant Avery pressed his weight onto the cane, each tap against the red brick sidewalk quick and clipped, as if he wanted the rhythm to outrun his own thoughts. The late morning sun fell sharp across the street, bleaching the corners of shop signs, warming the steel frames of parked cars. Sweat gathered at his temple though the air was cool. He had only left the rehabilitation center 10 minutes earlier, but already his body begged him to stop, to slow down. His mind refused. Inside his jacket pocket, the dog tag rested like an anchor. Cold metal against warm skin. It rattled with each step, reminding him of where he had been, of the sound of other tags clinking together in the desert wind. He squeezed the pocket once, quick and tight, as if he could silence the noise. But silence never lasted. The fear came without warning, always the same. A child's laugh from across the street turned too sharp, too sudden, and for a blink he thought it was a scream. The slam of a car door made his pulse spike, dragging his chest tight. He walked faster, cane striking harder, breath short. It wasn't pain that haunted him. It was the terror that the war would never let go, that even in the small town of Maple Ridge, among tidy porches and flagpoles, he would still hear echoes of things no one else could hear. He turned his face upward, the sky pale and cloudless, and forced himself to keep moving. Every step was a negotiation, past against present, memory against brick and sunlight. For a moment, he remembered a boy in uniform no older than 20, crumpled against sandbags, whispering for his mother. Grant had bent low, promising silently that the boy wasn't alone, though no one could hear his own pulse thundering. Now, years later, the memory replayed not as guilt but as a weight pressing on his shoulders. He stopped near the edge of the train station lot, chest heaving. The fear of being trapped forever in that loop gnawed at him, afraid that he would never step free, that every sound in this town would be stained by the war. Grant closed his eyes. He let the air in, rough and heavy, then exhaled until his lungs were nearly empty. A pause stretched long enough for the world to settle back into itself, just a flag shifting lazily, just the far-off hum of traffic. The fear didn't vanish, but it loosened, left space for something steadier. When he opened his eyes, he saw the station ahead, plain brick and glass, nothing remarkable. Yet in that ordinariness lay a test. He gripped the cane tighter, stood straighter, and stepped forward. The past would follow him, yes, but he realized strength was not an escape. It was in the decision to walk through the noise, to keep moving, even when every nerve in his body urged him to turn back. The train station looked ordinary, the kind of place no one would think twice about. A brick building with wide windows, a faded clock, the smell of oil and pastry blending into the air. Yet for Grant Avery, every corner carried weight. He sat on the wooden bench outside, the cane leaning against his knee, a paper cup of coffee balanced between his palms. The steam had long vanished, leaving only lukewarm liquid that tasted of cardboard, but he held it anyway, something to anchor his hands. People came and went. Mothers tugged children along, their laughter trailing like bright threads in the gray air. Businessmen pulled their rolling cases, wheels clattering against the bricks. A teenager in a varsity jacket leaned against the ticket booth, chewing gum, looking anywhere but at the crowd. No one looked at him. No one looked at the soldier with the limp, with the face too lined for his age. And that was fine. He didn't need their eyes. But the absence pressed on him. He wanted, more than he'd admit, for someone to notice, not to thank him, not to ask about the war, just to see him as present, not as a shadow. He sipped the cold coffee, grimaced, and set it down at his feet. A pigeon pecked near the cup, bold enough to hop onto the bench when he shifted. He let it, watching the small body twitch, head cock, wings ready to flee at the faintest sound. He knew that feeling too well. The dog tag was still in his pocket, pressing against his thigh like a hidden wound. He resisted touching it this time. To hold it was to remember too clearly. Instead, he pressed his palms together, fingers threaded tight, as if prayer might steady the tremor in his chest. But prayer had left him long ago, somewhere in the desert, buried under the same dust that had swallowed too many names. Around him, life kept moving in easy patterns. A bus hissed to a stop, brakes squealing. A conductor shouted times into the wind. The flag above the roofline tugged listlessly. Nothing demanded attention, nothing broke routine, and yet his own pulse ticked sharp, like a drum in a silent parade only he could hear. He closed his eyes. The sounds of Maple Ridge faded for a moment. Behind his eyelids came the battlefield, heat, sand, radios crackling, men shouting into a void. He felt his throat tighten. Fear was not in the memory itself, but in the sense that it might never leave him, that even here, on a quiet American street, the war would always find him. When he opened his eyes again, nothing had changed. A woman laughed near the ticket window. A child dropped a coin and chased it across the bricks. And he, Grant Avery, sat with a cooling cup and a cane, unseen. The emptiness stretched, heavy but familiar. He told himself it was enough to breathe through it. To let the silence sit, to let it pass like a train rumbling through and gone again. Maple Ridge Station carried the kind of rhythm that felt rehearsed, like a song played too many times. The brick facade was sun-faded, the windows smudged with fingerprints of travelers who had leaned too close. A flag hung from its pole at the corner, edges frayed, flapping weakly in the lazy breeze. There was nothing remarkable about it, and maybe that was what gave the place its gravity, an ordinary stage where lives crossed in passing. A bus sighed to a stop along the curb, brakes squealing, door folding open with a tired gasp. Alma, the driver, stepped out for a moment, her scarf tied loose, wiping her forehead with the back of her hand. She glanced toward Grant, lifted the scarf in a small wave, habit, not curiosity, before turning back to her route sheet. Even that simple gesture felt like a reminder, he was still visible, though only as part of the scenery. At the ticket booth, Mr. Duffy polished the glass window with slow circles. His shoulders hunched with the patience of someone who had done this work for decades. He didn't rush. He never did. The cloth in his hand squeaked faintly, a rhythm as steady as the second hand of the station clock. The sound filled the air more than conversation did. Children tugged their mothers' coats, pulling them toward the candy machine. The tinny clatter of coins dropping, the mechanical groan of candy tumbling down, followed by small hands reaching in with triumph. Their voices rose and fell in bright bursts, scattering across the station like startled birds. Grant felt the noise ripple through him, sharp at first, then dulling, like waves settling after a stone broke the surface. A man in a suit read a folded newspaper by the pillar, his briefcase balanced against his shin. He hardly moved except to turn the pages, the dry rustle echoing. Across the way, a teenage boy strummed at a guitar case, not to play but to kill time, tapping out uneven rhythms with bitten fingernails. It all knitted together, the hiss of buses, the shuffle of footsteps, the groan of vending machines, the squeak of Mr. Duffy's cloth. It was noise without urgency, life rolling forward with no single point of focus. Grant sat in it, cane resting against his thigh, the paper cup now empty at his feet. He let the sounds coat him, the ordinariness pressing closer. Yet under that ordinariness, a tension pulsed. The uniform rhythm, the practiced gestures, it reminded him of formation drills, of waiting for orders that never came. It was the stillness before something broke. He shifted slightly, shoulders tight, as though preparing for a signal. But nothing came. Just the everyday motions of a small American station, caught in its quiet loop. Grant sat among them as if he were part of the furniture, neither remarkable nor invisible, a shape tucked into the corner of the station's rhythm. Nobody stopped to stare, nobody lingered. He was just another traveler on a bench with a cane by his leg, the paper cup on the ground, his shoulders folded forward. Yet his eyes betrayed him. To the world, it was a small-town station on a slow afternoon. To him, it was layered with shadows. A suitcase rolled past, its handle cracked, one strap frayed and dangling. To the man pulling it, it was just worn luggage. To Grant, it was a soldier's rucksack half-torn after a night march, the fabric smelling of sweat and dust, heavy with more than gear. He blinked, but the image stayed, a ghost pinned to the ordinary. The wheels of a passing cart squealed against the floor, metal biting metal. It was a simple sound, mundane. Yet to him, it carried the edge of a far-off rifle crack. His chest tightened. The memory overlapped reality, blurred the lines until he could not trust his own ears. He steadied the cane against the ground, as if anchoring himself to brick and wood, to here and now. Across the platform, a train door slammed shut. The hollow boom rattled in his ribs, sharp enough to recall the concussion of mortars. The difference was clear: no sand, no smoke, but his body reacted anyway, shoulders nodding, breath short. He told himself it was just a door, just a train, just America. Still, his pulse raced as if he were crouched behind a wall again, waiting for the next round. People passed around him, carrying bags, snacks, folded tickets. Their movements had the ease of those who trusted the ground beneath them. Grant studied their faces, so open, so unaware. They didn't feel the tension humming in the rails, didn't hear the echo he carried. He envied them, the way they could move without thinking of exit routes, without measuring every sound for threat. The air smelled faintly of roasted peanuts from the vending stand. Once, that smell meant ball games and summer fairs. Today, it dragged him back to desert tents, where soldiers split rations with hands trembling, trying to taste normalcy in a place that had none. Even sweetness had become a memory with sharp edges. Grant rubbed his temple, as if pressure could erase what he saw overlaying the present. He longed to rest his eyes on something plain, untouched by memory. But the world refused. The station was safe, peaceful, ordinary, and yet every ordinary detail bent itself into the shape of something he feared. He sat there, a solitary figure among the bustle, a man out of step with his surroundings. Not remarkable, not noticed. And yet, in every corner of his gaze, war clung like a second skin, reminding him that he hadn't yet come all the way home. The sound broke the air like glass shattering, thin, sharp, impossible to ignore. "Mom!" The cry came again, raw and ragged, tearing from the throat of a boy no older than 7. He stood near the center of the concourse, too small for the crowd that swelled and folded around him. His hands balled into fists, chest heaving with each scream until the word itself grew hoarse, cracking into something closer to a plea than a call. Theo Martin. That was the name Grant would learn later. For now, he was just a child marooned in the middle of a busy station, a single voice straining against the tide. People turned, briefly. A man in a gray suit glanced over the rim of his newspaper, frowned, then looked away. A woman tugged her daughter closer, muttering something under her breath. A pair of teenagers slowed their stride for half a second, smirked, then kept walking. Eyes flickered, curiosity stirred, but only for a moment. The current of life kept pulling them forward, away from the sound, as though it were nothing but noise. But it wasn't noise. Not to Grant. The cry sliced through the station and through him, landing deep in the hollow space where his memories lived. He felt his pulse lurch, his shoulders tighten. He knew that sound, not the word, but the pitch, the edge. He had heard it before in desert outposts, in makeshift infirmaries, in the midnight scramble of panic. He had heard men shout for medics, boys whisper for mothers who would never arrive. That pitch always carried the same weight, terror unclothed. Theo's voice cracked again, softer this time. His throat was failing. The child's stance wavered, his feet shuffled uncertainly, as if the ground itself threatened to give way. He looked too small against the station's high ceiling, too thin among the sturdy bodies brushing past him. Grant gripped the handle of his cane, pressing it down hard to ground himself. His eyes fixed on the boy. The cry had rung out sharp in public, but its echo left a deeper silence, as if the crowd had conspired to erase it. Around him, the station hummed on, announcements blaring tinny through speakers, the squeal of brakes as a bus pulled in outside, the rustle of coats and tickets. Yet threaded through it all was that one voice, raw and breaking, demanding to be heard though no one wished to hear it. Grant inhaled, sharp and quick, his chest tight. He had come here expecting nothing, just an afternoon bench, a cooling coffee, another day of blending into the background. But now the air itself was different. The boy's scream had split it, carved open the surface of the ordinary, and exposed something else underneath, the quiet truth of abandonment. The boy's voice cracked, then stopped. What lingered afterward was worse than the scream itself. Silence stretched, thick and unwelcoming, swallowing the space he had carved with his cry. Theo's lips pressed together, skin pale around the edges of his mouth. His small fists opened and closed at his sides, unsure whether to fight or fold. He tugged at the zipper of his backpack again and again, the motion frantic at first, then slower, as if the gesture alone might anchor him, might keep him from dissolving into the crowd. People hurried past, pretending not to see. That was the part that tightened in Grant's chest, the way eyes flicked away so quickly, the way footsteps picked up pace. It wasn't cruelty, not exactly. It was fear of involvement, fear of being delayed, fear of witnessing something they didn't know how to name. In their avoidance, they built a wall taller than stone, indifference made solid. Grant felt it pressing against him too, the temptation to stay still, to remain another shadow on the bench. His cane leaned by his knee, the empty cup at his feet. He could have folded back into the station's rhythm, told himself it was not his place. But the silence was unbearable. It was the kind of silence he had known in the desert, after a radio transmission cut off mid-sentence. The silence that meant someone wasn't going to answer back. Theo looked around, eyes wide and rimmed red, searching not for his mother anymore but for anyone willing to hold his gaze. Nobody met it. Adults steered children aside. Teenagers lowered their heads. The boy's shoulders slumped, a fragile surrender, though his chest still rose with shallow breaths. Grant shifted, the wood of the bench creaking beneath his weight. He pressed the tip of the cane to the ground until it clicked against the brick. That sound, faint as it was, felt louder than all the voices ignoring the child. It was a marker, he was still here, still able to choose. The silence wrapped tighter, humming with denial. Grant recognized it for what it was, a cage more dangerous than noise. Screams could be answered. Cries could be met. But silence left the boy stranded, made him invisible. That invisibility was what had nearly broken soldiers he once knew. Not the wounds, not the fatigue, but the feeling of being unseen, forgotten, erased. Grant's pulse hammered. He let the air out through his nose, sharp, his decision not yet action but leaning toward it. The boy fumbled with the zipper one last time, then froze, standing perfectly still, a statue of waiting. The station carried on around him, relentless, as though he weren't there at all. And that absence, that collective refusal, was louder than any scream. In the boy's silence, Grant saw a reflection of himself. It was not the child's face exactly, but the posture, the way Theo's small shoulders curled inward, as though trying to make himself smaller than the space he occupied. That shape was familiar. It carried him back to a night years ago, across an ocean, under a sky with no stars. He remembered the heat first, the kind that clung to skin even after sunset, thick and merciless. The outpost was quiet that night, too quiet, only the buzz of radios and the restless shuffle of boots in sand. Then a voice had cracked across the air, not loud, not even clear. Just a plea. He never forgot the sound, one word stretched thin, breaking at the edges, swallowed almost immediately by silence. Grant had turned his head, scanning shadows where the sound had come from. He remembered crouching, his knees pressed into hot gravel, eyes searching for movement that never showed itself. He remembered the helplessness, the certainty that someone out there was calling for help that would not arrive. The silence afterward was heavier than the desert air, heavier than the rifle on his shoulder. Now, in Maple Ridge Station, the weight returned. He looked at Theo and felt the same ache, a cry that no one answered, a small figure stranded in a place that should have been safe. His chest constricted, breath catching against the memory's grip. The boy tugged once more at his backpack zipper. The motion, repetitive, desperate, reminded Grant of the way soldiers fidgeted with straps or gear when they were scared but couldn't admit it. Small actions that betrayed what words couldn't. He felt his hand drift unconsciously toward his pocket, fingertips brushing the edge of the dog tag there, as if metal might tether him. Around him, the station went on, footsteps echoing, announcements rattling overhead. But for Grant, those sounds blurred into the thrum of generators, the distant crack of gunfire, the whistle of wind across sandbags. His body couldn't tell the difference. His heart was back in that night, waiting for an answer that never came. He shut his eyes tight. When he opened them, the boy was still there, still silent, still waiting. The reflection didn't vanish, it deepened. Grant wasn't looking at a stranger anymore. He was looking at the younger version of himself. Unseen, unheard, holding everything in a fragile posture that might collapse at the next gust of indifference. Grant leaned forward, cane firm against the floor. His pulse raced, but beneath the racing came something steadier, quieter. Recognition. Not pity, not even fear. Just the knowledge that he could not allow the past to replay itself. The boy's silence mirrored his own, and if no one else would break it, then he would. Grant rose from the bench slowly, the wood groaning under his weight, cane tapping once against the brick floor. The sound felt like a small announcement, but no one looked his way. All eyes were still elsewhere, anywhere but at the boy who had fallen silent. He crossed the space in careful steps, each one deliberate, measured, as if the ground itself might betray him. The boy stood frozen, lips tight, fingers curled around the strap of his backpack. His chest rose and fell in shallow bursts, breath catching like a bird trapped in a box. Grant stopped in front of him and lowered himself down, joints stiff, until his eyes aligned with the child's. The world above them kept moving, footsteps echoing, announcements rattling overhead, the rustle of coats brushing past. But here, at ground level, the station narrowed to two figures, the veteran and the boy. He didn't speak. Words often carried weight too heavy for moments like this. Instead, Grant unscrewed the cap of a water bottle he'd been carrying since morning, the plastic crinkling softly. He set it on the bench beside Theo, sliding it within reach. The boy blinked at it, uncertain, his fingers twitching but not moving. Grant then reached into his pocket. The metal was cold, familiar, biting against his palm as he drew it out. His dog tag, simple, worn, edges dulled from years of friction. He opened his hand, letting it rest across his palm, extended just far enough for the boy to see. Theo's eyes fixed on it. Slowly, almost reluctantly, one trembling hand reached forward. His fingertips brushed the metal, then lingered, as if to test whether it was real. Grant didn't move, didn't push. He simply held still, an anchor in the rush of the station. The child's breathing shifted. Still quick, but steadier now, less ragged. His gaze flicked upward, meeting Grant's for the first time. The fear wasn't gone, not entirely. But in its place was something thinner, quieter. Recognition, perhaps. The simple knowledge that someone had seen him, someone had not turned away. Grant let the tag rest in the boy's hand for a moment before closing his fingers gently over it, steadying the small palm with his own. He didn't need to say that it was all right. The gesture said enough: you are not invisible. Around them, the station carried on, indifferent. But in that small circle carved out between two strangers, the silence had been broken not by words, but by presence. For a moment, it seemed the boy steadied. His breathing slowed, the trembling in his hands eased as he clutched the metal tag. Yet beneath the fragile calm, Grant noticed something that unsettled him more than the cry had. A mark. Just above the child's wrist, where the sleeve of his jacket had slipped back, a bruise darkened the pale skin in thin lines, almost like the press of something that had held too tight. The boy rubbed at it absent-mindedly, as though the habit had been carved into him, his fingers circling the mark instead of scratching. Grant's chest tightened. He told himself it could have been a fall, a playground accident, something ordinary. But his body knew better. He had seen men with the same hollow look, carrying marks on their skin that spoke of control, not clumsiness. The recognition came fast and sharp, a thread pulling taut across his memories. Theo adjusted the strap of his backpack again, jerking it higher as if to shield himself. His gaze flicked sideways, scanning the crowd, but not searching for his mother this time. It was the glance of someone expecting to be caught, bracing for a hand to clamp down. The motion carried the echo of soldiers glancing at doorways before entering, knowing danger might be waiting. Too young, Grant thought. Far too young to hold that kind of reflex. The station around them churned on, blind to the details. A woman's laugh burst near the vending machine. A conductor barked out times. Someone dropped a set of keys, the clatter ringing sharp before being swept back into the hum of footsteps. Nobody noticed the bruise. Nobody saw the way the boy's shoulders curled, as if anticipating a blow. Grant shifted on his cane, his weight pressing down harder than necessary. The rubber tip squeaked against the floor, grounding him. He didn't move closer, not yet. He simply stayed level with the boy, his presence a barrier against the unseen. The silence between them had changed shape. It wasn't just about being noticed anymore. It was about being protected. Theo's fingers tightened around the dog tag again. His knuckles whitened, his small hand gripping it like a lifeline. His lips parted, but no sound came. Grant knew that silence too, the silence of people who had learned it was safer not to speak. He inhaled slowly, chest aching, and exhaled through his teeth. The ordinary world pressed in from all sides, indifferent. But in that narrow pocket of space, Grant felt the truth: the boy wasn't just lost. He was carrying something heavier. And the bruise on his wrist was proof. The boy's grip on the dog tag had barely steadied when a new shadow fell across them. Shoes clicking sharp against the tile. A woman's figure cut through the crowd, her coat gray, the collar pulled high, her steps urgent but oddly rehearsed. She leaned down before anyone else could react, voice low but edged, "There you are." Her hand reached for Theo's arm, fingers already curling, claiming. Grant's cane pressed firmer against the floor. He didn't rise immediately, he studied. The way the woman avoided looking at him, the way her smile was too quick, too practiced. She wasn't the kind of stranger who stumbles upon a lost child, she was someone who expected to be challenged. Theo flinched before her touch landed, shoulders jerking, breath stuttering. His eyes flicked to Grant, pleading, uncertain, a silent SOS. That glance told more than any shout could. Grant shifted forward, blocking half the boy's body with his own frame. He didn't speak. He simply placed his hand over Theo's shoulder, slow and steady, a barrier rather than a shove. The woman's hand hovered, then faltered. Her smile tightened. "I'm his aunt," she murmured, words directed more to the air than to him. The claim hung there, brittle, unconvincing. Grant's silence weighed heavier than argument. His gaze fixed on her, unblinking, steady as stone. The pause stretched long enough that the bustle of the station seemed to move around them, leaving a bubble of tension intact. Theo's grip on the dog tag tightened until his knuckles whitened. His body leaned subtly into Grant's side, a child's instinct answering before his voice could. The woman's hand finally withdrew. She adjusted her collar, eyes darting toward the exit. The mask of confidence cracked for an instant, showing something harsher beneath: frustration, calculation. Then, just as quickly, it was gone. She straightened, muttered something about a mistake, and turned back into the tide of commuters. The crowd absorbed her, indifferent. Only Grant and Theo remained in the wake of the encounter, the space suddenly colder. Grant exhaled, slow. His palm still rested on the boy's shoulder. He could feel the tremor running through the small frame, not from cold, but from the shock of nearly being taken. Around them, nothing had changed: buses hissed, vendors shouted, children laughed. Yet for Grant, the station felt altered. The bruise on Theo's wrist was no longer just a question. It was a thread leading to something darker. And the appearance of the gray-coated woman had tugged at that thread. The boy stayed pressed against him, silent but anchored. Grant tightened his grip on the cane, sensing in his bones that the story unfolding was larger than chance. The unease was no longer in his head. It was walking in plain daylight. The station loudspeaker crackled, words spilling out flat and metallic: "Renee Martin, please come to the main concourse." Renee Martin. The voice repeated, then dissolved into static. Grant felt the boy twitch beneath his hand. Theo's head lifted, hope and dread tangling in his eyes. He clutched the dog tag tighter, as if the cold metal could guarantee her arrival. The air seemed to shift. Footsteps quickened in one direction. A figure broke through the crowd, a woman running, her apron still dusted with flour, the sleeves of her blouse rolled unevenly as though she had left in a hurry. Strands of hair slipped loose from a bun, sticking to her damp cheeks. She stopped short when she saw them. Her chest heaved, mouth open, but no words came. For a heartbeat the entire concourse seemed to pause, sound dropping into the background. She just stood there, frozen, eyes locked on the boy. Theo didn't move either. His knees bent slightly, as if ready to retreat or run. His lips parted, but only air came out, thin and sharp. His body swayed in place, as though the ground beneath him might tilt. Grant glanced from one to the other. The distance between them was barely 20 feet, but it stretched like a mile. Years of absence, minutes of panic, the gray-coated woman's shadow, all of it lay heavy in that gap. The mother lifted a hand, tentative, trembling. Her palm faced outward, an old instinct of comfort, though it wavered midair. She whispered something soundless, words only her son might read on her lips. Theo blinked rapidly, his face contorting. The bruise on his wrist stood out against his pale skin as he shifted the backpack strap again, nervous, uncertain. His gaze darted back to Grant, seeking some kind of anchor in this unfolding storm. Grant stayed still, hand firm on the cane, the other steady on the boy's shoulder. He didn't move to bridge the distance. This wasn't his step to take. All he could do was hold the silence, keep it from swallowing them both. The noise of the station returned, a train horn blared in the distance, a baby cried, vendors called out for customers. Yet around the three of them, the sounds thinned, muffled, as though glass had dropped over their space. The moment belonged only to them. The woman, Renee, took a slow step forward. Another. Her breathing ragged, her apron shifting with each stride. The flour marks smeared, fingerprints of a day abandoned. Still, she walked, until she stood just short of reaching the boy. Theo's knuckles whitened on the dog tag. His small chest rose in uneven waves. The silence held, unbearable and yet unbreakable. Between mother and son, the air quivered, thick with everything unsaid. The moment hung suspended, like a breath caught between two heartbeats. Theo's small frame trembled, his fingers clutching the dog tag until the metal bit into his palm. His chest rose in quick, uneven gasps, but his gaze never left the woman a few feet away, the mother who had arrived like a storm after months of absence. Renee Martin's eyes were wide, glistening with unshed tears. She knelt down slightly, as if to bridge the distance, but Theo did not move forward. His body stiffened, his knees bending in hesitation, shoulders tense. Grant could feel the tension radiating off him in thin, quivering waves. The boy was caught between the instinct to rush to safety and the memory of every shadow that had once loomed over him. Grant's hand remained on the boy's shoulder, steady, grounding. He did not speak, did not prod. The dog tag still rested in Theo's palm, a small weight that seemed to anchor him to something tangible, something real. The boy's fingers flexed against it, testing its solidity, drawing courage from its cold surface. Around them, the station hummed on, indifferent. Commuters passed, some glancing briefly, others absorbed in their own trajectories. The train that had been idling in the distance shuddered to life, brakes squealing faintly, wheels grinding along the rails. None of it penetrated the bubble that had formed around the three figures. Renee extended a hand, small and tentative, toward her son. Theo's eyes flicked to Grant, and then back to his mother. The hesitation stretched, a long, taut thread of possibility. For a second, the past 2 years of absence, the silent nights, the searching, the fear, condensed into that split second. The boy's gaze measured Grant, measured the distance he had crossed, the safety offered, the promise in stillness. Then, almost imperceptibly, Theo's shoulders shifted. He leaned slightly forward, just enough to close the space, and his hand lifted off the dog tag. Grant felt the tiny pulse of motion against his palm, a subtle surrender. The boy was choosing. Grant's own posture softened imperceptibly. His fingers, still lightly resting on Theo's shoulder, gave a small press of reassurance. Not a push, not a pull, just presence, proof that someone remained steadfast, that the silence could be broken without noise or force. The mother's hand met her son's with a quiet gravity. Their fingertips brushed, the connection brief, delicate, yet it was enough. Theo's lips parted slightly, a breath escaping, then another, and then the faintest movement of relief. He did not collapse into her immediately, did not rush into arms that had been absent, but he allowed himself to step closer, to occupy the space between them. Grant exhaled slowly, tension leaving his shoulders. The dog tag was no longer a lifeline for the boy alone, it had been a bridge, a symbol of continuity, of someone waiting in the storm. The station resumed its rhythm around them, but the bubble persisted, imperceptible to the crowd yet absolute to those within. In that silent exchange, Theo made the first choice of trust, the mother waited in quiet surrender, and Grant bore witness. Nothing shouted, nothing clashed. The world continued, indifferent, while a small act of courage and patience carved a permanent mark. The boy's step forward was slight, almost hesitant, but in it was all that mattered. One simple decision, one movement in space and time, sealed the first promise of reconnection, the first acknowledgement that someone had not turned away. A small gnat of motion in a station full of indifferent hums, but to Grant, to Theo, and to Renee, it carried everything. Night had fallen over Maple Ridge, and the quiet that came with it was both welcome and unfamiliar. Grant Avery pushed open the creaking door of his small porch apartment, the familiar scent of old wood and polish greeting him. He set the cane aside, letting the weight of the day settle. The city's distant hum filtered through the windows. The occasional honk, the faint patter of a car over wet pavement, but inside, it was still, almost reverent. On the table, a small envelope lay out of place. Paper crumpled, edges uneven, the kind of note you might find tucked under a library book or forgotten in the corner of a drawer. He picked it up, careful not to crease it further, and unfolded it. The handwriting was uneven, wobbly in the way that only children can manage, the letters leaning this way and that as if caught mid-run. "Thank you, Mr. Grant, Theo," it read. The words were simple, but in their simplicity carried everything the boy could not say aloud: gratitude, relief, recognition, trust. A bridge built with pencil strokes instead of voice. At the corner of the paper, a faint smudge of white powder marked where fingers had pressed, smeared, left the imprint of flour from Renee's rush day. Grant traced it lightly with a fingertip, letting the texture anchor him. A mother's hands, a child's fingers, the faint residue of chaos and care, small signs of presence in a world that often felt indifferent. He set the note down, then reached for the dog tag in his pocket. The metal was cold against his palm, a reminder of distant deserts, of nights spent listening for sounds that never came. Yet now, in this quiet room, it felt like a bridge to a silent promise that he had shown up, that he had stood still when no one else had. Grant sank into the chair by the table, letting his eyes roam over the page again. He noticed the crumpled fold at the corner, the slight tear at the bottom edge where Theo's nervous fingers had caught the paper. The imperfections mattered, they were evidence of effort, of authenticity. It was not a perfect gesture, but a real one, and in realness, there was healing. Outside, the wind brushed against the porch, carrying with it the faint scent of damp leaves and asphalt. He listened to it, long and steady, and thought of the boy now sleeping somewhere safe, mother at his side. The day's chaos was gone, replaced by small, intimate traces of courage, a note, a tag, the residual flower of a mother who had run as fast as she could. Grant exhaled, a long, slow release, and let the tension in his shoulders fall away. No triumphal moment, no applause, just the quiet understanding that presence itself can be enough. That standing in the space, holding the line of attention, can create safety and trust in ways words cannot. He leaned back, letting the chair support him, eyes fixed on the crumpled paper. In it, he saw the proof of connection. Theo had been seen, heard, and returned to someone who cared. The flower smudge, the crooked letters, the dog tag resting beside it, all small, tangible reminders that even in a world of indifference, acts of care could leave lasting marks. Grant's gaze lingered, and for the first time that evening, he allowed himself a smile. Not broad, not triumphant, but quiet, small, enough to reach across the hours and miles of fear that had brought them to this moment. The night had thickened. Maple Ridge was quiet, but for Grant Avery, the station's hum lingered faintly in his memory, like a distant heartbeat. He stepped onto the porch of his small apartment, letting the creaking boards bear his weight. The cane rested against the side of the doorway, a familiar friend now. His hands moved automatically toward the table. There lay the crumpled note Theo had given him, edges soft from being held, corners pressed unevenly. Grant smoothed it gently with a fingertip, tracing the crooked letters that carried more meaning than words could ever manage. "Thank you, Mr. Grant, Theo." Each letter, each stroke, seemed to hum with the boy's presence, the mother's rush, the small moments of trust stitched together in silence. He folded the note carefully, methodical, as though preserving a fragile piece of history. One crease could alter it, one slip could undo the care that had gone into the gesture. The white smudge of flour at the edge spoke to him of running, of hands that worked hard but moved in love. The note was proof that small acts, silent, patient, deliberate, could leave marks heavier than any shout. Outside, wind whispered through the trees, carrying the damp scent of grass and earth from the garden below. The night smelled of rain yet to fall, of soil cooling under the stars. Grant inhaled, letting it fill his lungs and settle the tightness in his chest. The day had ended, but the echoes of it lingered. Theo's gasp, Renee's hurried steps, the dog tag's cold edge against his palm. All of it had passed through him, but he had remained, present, witnessing. He leaned back, letting the chair support him, gaze fixed on the note. He imagined the boy asleep, safe at last, the mother at his side. There was no triumph, no loud victory. But there was something quieter, more enduring. The proof that someone had not turned away, that someone had stayed when the world threatened indifference. Grant allowed a small smile, the kind that barely lifted the corners of the mouth but carried weight in the chest. The kind that knew it had mattered, just enough, and that would linger in memory long after the night had passed. He placed the note in a small drawer, next to the dog tag, as if storing both together could preserve the connection, the promise, the moment in amber. The distant sound of a train horn drifted through the town, long and slow, reverberating against brick and pavement. Grant closed his eyes, letting the vibration pass through him, settling into a rhythm that matched the quiet thump of his heart. He thought, perhaps for the first time that evening, not about war, or failure, or fear, but about the power of being present. Sometimes, he realized, it wasn't the heroes who mattered most. It was the ones who remained, the ones who did not turn away. The ones who watched, and waited, and held the space open. In the silence, in the small gestures, life's weight could be carried gently, without violence, without loud declaration. Grant exhaled one last time, slow and even. The wind carried with it the scent of wet grass, of soil, of a night that had held its secrets close. He remained seated for a long while, letting the warmth of quiet fill the space. The story had ended in nothing more than a pause, but it was enough. Enough to know that even in darkness, someone had stayed.